Hey guys, tonight we wander down a crumbling sea-slicked path on the English coast where waves gnaw at cliffs and secrets long buried in stone lie waiting to be seen. A storm is coming. You can taste the salt and electricity on your tongue, and the wind howls like it knows something you don't. Somewhere in the town of Lyme Regis, a baby girl lies quiet in her mother's arms, miraculously quiet considering she was struck by lightning just moments ago. Yes, struck by lightning. You probably won't survive this. They say it happened during a traveling fair. A sudden bolt from the heavens exploded a tree, killing the woman holding the infant instantly. The baby thrown to the ground was presumed dead too, but then she stirred and cried. The townspeople took it as an omen. That baby, they whispered, must be destined for something strange. Her name, Mary Anning. And tonight we're going to trace her footsteps across wet sands and rock shelves, from the moment she first opened her eyes to the moment history finally opened its own. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere in the world with its own foggy cliffs or old superstitions, tell me where you are and what time it is. I love knowing who's out there with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're growing up in Lyme Regis, a little coastal town in southwest England that's mostly sea spray, slippery cobbles, and stories about long dead sailors. It's the early 1800s, and there's not much here but fishing church and the constant erosion of anything not nailed down, including the homes, including the people. Your father, Richard, is a cabinet maker, which sounds respectable, but really just means he's poor and usually has wood shavings in his shoes. When the cabinet business dries up, he takes to fossil hunting. Not for science, no, but to sell the strange rocks to seaside visitors who'll buy anything they don't understand. They call them curiosities. You call them survival. He takes you along, of course. It's cheaper than childcare. You follow him along the blue Lias cliffs where each wave and winter storm chips away another secret from the past. He teaches you how to spot the ridges of ammonites curled like cinnamon buns and how to gently tap around them with a hammer so they come out whole, not shattered. You're 6. Your hands are too small for the hammer, but your eyes are sharp. When he dies just a few years later from a fall, from illness, from poverty, historians still argue what exactly took him. You're left with a family of mouths and no money. The roof leaks, the food runs thin, and yet you keep looking for fossils. Because unlike everything else in your world, they stay still. They don't argue. They don't vanish. You begin to understand their language. You know the shape of a belemnite by heart. You can tell a crinoid stem from a sea urchin spine with a single glance. And you start selling them from a little shop window below your home wooden trays of ancient sea creatures next to the onions and candlesticks. People start to notice, mostly tourists who think the ammonites are snail shells, but sometimes real scholars, or men pretending to be real scholars with top hats and loud voices and no clue what they're looking at. You quietly correct them. They don't always like that. One visitor in particular, a man in an absurd waistcoat, asks you where you found this little fellow and points to an ichthyosaur vertebra the size of his palm. You tell him it was behind the church cliff, beneath the clay layer, just before the tide came in. He chuckles and calls it luck. You smile and nod. But it wasn't luck. It was lightning. It's always been lightning. You wake up every morning in Lyme Regis to the peculiar mix of sea brine coal smoke and the slow creak of the old wood beams above your head. The wind taps at the windows like it's asking to come in. And some mornings it does. You tug your shawl tighter around your shoulders and shuffle across the uneven floorboards of the cottage, careful not to stub your toes on the fossil crates you've stacked under every available table and chair. It's not exactly a palace. It's barely a house. But it's what you've got, and it leaks only when it rains, which is unfortunately every other day. The year is somewhere around 1815, though the town doesn't seem to notice centuries passing. The women here still draw water by hand and gossip through fogged windows. And the cliffs, they change constantly. With every storm, new layers crumble away like pages falling out of an old book. You've learned to walk them, not like a tourist, but like someone in a long, slow conversation with the earth. You know where the shale breathes and where the limestone groans, which bits of clay are likely to slip, and which overhangs are held up by nothing but stubbornness and fossil glue. You're still a teenager, really, but already you're hardened in ways few grown men could understand. Your hands are strong from chiseling and hauling slabs. Your eyes are sharp, scanning the cliffs in horizontal lines, always alert for the slight curve of a shell or the glitter of calcite. The tourists from Bath and London might smile and ask what a nice girl like you is doing with a geologist's hammer. You smile back, sell them a belemnite, and charge them double if they call it a funny stone. You live on that income as meager as it is. Ammonites, crinoids, devil's toenails, technically graphia, but you don't correct the nickname. It sells better that way. You've even taken to writing little signs for your curios, things like vertebrae of a fish lizard, possibly pre-biblical. That kind of phrasing does well with curious tourists and confused clergymen alike. Still, some days you go without much food. Butter is a luxury. Coal is rationed carefully, lump by lump. The dog. Trey sometimes gets a better meal than you, and yet you press on because you know intimately that something always waits beneath the surface. All it takes is patience and a little luck. Joseph, your older brother, helps now and then. He's got a steady hand and a good sketching eye, though he's more interested in church records and his own musings than mucking about in cold mud. But one day, while out walking the base of Black Ven, he comes across something odd, a row of bones, neatly in line, poking out from the cliffside, like the spine of a sleeping beast. You both return the next day, tools in hand. You take the lead. Naturally, he finds them, but you free them. The cliff is brittle, and the tide isn't far off, so you work quickly, carefully, whispering apologies to the bones when your chisel slips. The more you uncover, the more impossible it seems. A full skeleton, intact, head to tail. Its skull alone is longer than your arm. The jaws are lined with rows of sharp teeth that curve backward as if designed to trap prey with no escape. It's not a crocodile, not a whale, not anything in your illustrated guides. This is something else entirely, something ancient, something new, or rather very old and just now seen again. The townspeople don't know what to make of it. Some say it's a sea serpent. Others whisper darker things. The local pastor stops by and mutters about the flood. A woman with lace gloves insists it must be fake. A child couldn't possibly dig out something so extraordinary. You let her hold one of its teeth. She goes pale. You display it piece by piece in your family's shop. People come from as far as Exeter just to see it. One man brings a magnifying glass and asks to sketch it. Another offers to buy it on the spot. You refuse at first, but money is money, and the rent is due. Eventually it ends up in London, crated and carted off. A museum there, one you've never seen and probably never will, puts it on display. Experts declare it an ichthyosaurus, a so-called fish lizard, and soon the newspapers pick up the story, remarkable fossil unearthed in Dorset. There's even a woodcut of the skeleton. Your name isn't mentioned. Historians still argue whether this moment, your discovery of the ichthyosaur, is the real start of vertebrate paleontology. Some credit the men who later wrote about it. Some say you were just a girl with a good eye and some luck. Others, more generous, say you were a natural-born scientist long before anyone dared call you one. Back home, life remains simple. The roof still leaks. The wind still moans down the chimney. But something has shifted. You've pulled a monster from the cliffs, and now the world, though it doesn't fully know you yet, has begun to stir. That night you sit by the fire, your skirts damp from spray, your hands blackened from shale dust. You rub a thumb over a tiny ammonite, watching the candlelight catch its ridges. You know there are more out there. Bigger ones, stranger ones, waiting. And tomorrow, if the tide allows, you'll go find them. The cliffs are darker this morning. A thick mist drapes over Lyme Regis like a damp shawl, muting the cries of gulls and softening the crunch of gravel beneath your boots. You know this weather, it's not quite rain, not quite fog, but it slicks everything in a greasy sheen that makes the shale harder to grip. Perfect for slipping, but also perfect for spotting freshly exposed fossils. You move carefully, fingers curled around your hammer boots, angled to keep from sliding down the slope. Behind you, the dog pants, tail wagging despite the cold. Trey doesn't mind the weather. He minds only when you stop moving. He's not much for conversation, but he's the best assistant you've ever had. He's even barked once to alert you to an incoming landslide. Or maybe it was just a squirrel. You prefer the heroic version. The beach below the cliff is scattered with bits of last night's erosion, chunks of rock slabs of clay, a few waterlogged feathers, and bones. Always bones. Some are fish, some are birds. But occasionally you find something that doesn't quite belong to anything living anymore. Something that looks like it swam in ancient oceans, not this choppy gray channel. You crouch beside a jagged outcrop and run your fingers over it. There, just under the surface, a curve. You tap gently. The echo is soft, hollow. Bone. You keep going, working in small circles, widening the hole, brushing away shale flakes with the side of your hand. And slowly, slowly, the shape emerges. It's a vertebra, large, symmetrical, and somehow heavier than it should be. You recognize the pattern in another ichthyosaur, or at least a cousin. You glance up at the sky. Still holding. You've got maybe 2 hours before the tide returns to reclaim its treasures. You dig like time owes you something. Back at home, your small fossil shop is starting to look less like a hobby and more like a museum. Wooden trays line every surface, each filled with carefully labeled specimens. You handwrite tags with names and ages and sometimes little jokes. Don't step on this sea lily, she's 90 million years old. The tourists eat it up. One man visiting from London is particularly impressed by your sketches. You've taken to drawing the full skeletons you've uncovered to scale with meticulous attention to where each piece fits. No one taught you anatomy. No one needed to. The bones speak for themselves if you're quiet long enough to listen. He asks you to make him a full diagram of the ichthyosaur for publication. You agree. You spend a week on it working by candlelight, the ink smudging at your sleeves, your fingertips perpetually stained. When he publishes it months later, he credits himself for the work. You're mentioned once as a local girl. You grit your teeth. Then you go back to the cliffs. Historians still argue over whether you contributed or collaborated in early scientific reports of your finds. Some say you merely assisted. Others insist your diagrams were better than anything the Royal Society produced. You know what you did, and you also know how often your name was left off the page. Still, you're not in this for glory. Not really. You're in this because it's the only place you feel whole. Out here with the wind stinging your cheeks and the wet shale cold against your knees, you feel like part of something older and bigger than any drawing room debate. These cliffs are your parish. The bones are your gospel. And sometimes the cliffs give you something rare, like today. You're hacking away at a thick seam of clay when your chisel hits something smooth and concave. Not a shell, not a rock. You widen the space, careful not to split it. And then with a soft pull, it comes free, an ichthyosaur skull. Another one, but this one's different, larger. The eye socket is massive, and it's intact. You clean it slowly over days, using only warm water and a brush made from stiff pig bristles. You memorize every curve, every tooth. You even name it, though you never tell anyone. It's your secret. A little nod of gratitude to a creature that waited 200 million years just to meet you. And here's a strange tidbit you've started to dream about them, not in a frightening way. More like old friends visiting in sleep. They swim through your dreams the way they must have once swum through prehistoric seas, sleek, fast, unafraid. Sometimes you imagine what the world looked like when they were alive. Sometimes you wonder if they remember you too. One night you fall asleep with your hand resting on a fossilized jawbone. The next morning your fingers ache as if they'd been holding something in your sleep. You don't tell anyone about this. They'd think it's nonsense. But you know the truth. The monsters are speaking. Your mother still doesn't quite know what to make of your obsession with bones. She worries, of course, about the cliffs, the cold, the constant threat of injury, or worse, of people's gossip. Lyme Regis is not a city of great tolerance, after all. A young woman spending more time in muck and stone than in church or social calls tends to attract more raised eyebrows than praise. But she also knows the truth you bring in the income. Without your fossils, the cupboard would be empty. Again, so she lets you work. Sometimes she even helps you wash. The smaller finds the ammonites, the vertebrae, the fossil fish with paper-thin fins and teeth like grains of rice. Together you sit by the fire hands red from the icy water, sorting out pieces of a past that once swam and soared above your ancestors' heads. You're getting better at finding them, too. You've developed a sense for the cliffs, almost like instinct. You know, when they've been freshened by rain, when a new crack in the shale signals that something has shifted beneath the surface. You know that the sea doesn't just erode, it reveals. Sometimes it feels like the earth itself is helping you, like it wants to be understood. One afternoon, you and Joseph head out together. You've brought a rope, just in case. The cliffs are steep and the tide's tricky, and it's easier not to die when someone else is watching. That's the sort of sibling logic that keeps things simple. You scan the cliff face as he sketches a formation nearby. Then you see it. A flat, oval-shaped bone embedded just above head height. You scale the rock like a spider using boot holes you've carved into the mudstone months ago, As you scrape around it, more bones emerge. Ribs, a pelvis, and then a skull, half shattered but unmistakably enormous. This isn't just any fossil. This is a complete skeleton, a full articulated beast. It takes weeks of careful excavation. You return every day, sometimes before dawn, sometimes in the pouring rain. Your skirts become stiff with dried clay. Your hands blister. Your dog whines and tries to chew on a femur at one point. But you persist. By the end, you've unearthed one of the most intact ichthyosaur skeletons ever seen. A monstrous thing nearly 20 feet long, its bones curled like it died in mid-swim. The spine arches beautifully. The jaw is lined with teeth so precise and wicked that they look like they were carved yesterday. You bring the bones back piece by piece, wheeling them down the muddy path in a borrowed cart past fishermen who tip their hats and tourists who blink in confusion. Most of them think you're mad, or a witch, or maybe both. You quite enjoy that. The local newspaper finally takes notice. A small column appears. Strange sea monster found by local woman. They get your name right at least, and the article suggests, tentatively, that your fossil might be evidence of creatures unknown to our current world. Revolutionary stuff, though. Of course, it's buried beneath gossip about a town parson's lost cat and a bake sale in Dorchester. Still, word spreads. And before long, curious gentlemen in long coats and Latin vocabularies come knocking. Some ask you to explain your methods, others offer to buy. A few insist you must have had help from someone more educated. You do your best to smile through it. But occasionally, when no one's looking, you let out a long sigh into the sea breeze and mutter things not entirely suited for polite society. A man named Henri de la Beche, a geologist with a fondness for you, creates a watercolor painting inspired by your fossil finds. He titles it Duria Antiquior, a more ancient Dorset. It's one of the first reconstructions of prehistoric life ever made a visual of ichthyosaurs chasing fish across warm ancient seas. He gives you the proceeds from its sale. You use the money to keep the roof from caving in. Here's a curious tidbit. For a brief while, children start playing Mary Anning instead of house. They march along the cliffs with sticks for hammers, calling out pretend fossil finds and correcting each other's species names. You watch them once from a distance, heart quietly full. And yet, even with fame growing, your purse remains light. No university offers you a position. No museum puts your name on a plaque. You're invited to speak nowhere. The Royal Society, still entirely male, still utterly uninterested in your voice. Historians still argue whether this was simply the culture of the time, or whether certain powerful men deliberately minimized your role to elevate their own. Some letters suggest admiration, others patronizing dismissal. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. You, however, don't wait for permission. You keep digging, because you've learned a rule that few scientists ever admit aloud. The rocks don't care who you are. They don't ask for titles. They don't require a pedigree. They crack and crumble just the same under any hand that knows where to press. And tonight, with the waves hissing softly, in the distance you press your hand gently into the shale and feel it give. The morning begins like most others, gray sky, stiff breeze, and your bones protesting the cold before your feet even hit the floor. The fire has gone out again. You dress quickly, layers over layers, and warm your hands around the tea kettle, though it hasn't yet boiled. The cliffs call louder than comfort, and today you feel something waiting out there. You can't explain it. You've stopped trying to. Some days the fossils speak and some days they stay quiet. But today feels different. By mid-morning, you're walking the familiar route along Black Ven, the dog darting ahead, nose to the ground. The sky threatens rain, but holds off for now. The sea below is restless, crashing harder than usual against the shore. You take that as a good sign. Storms always reveal something. You move slowly across the unstable slope eyes, scanning the mudstone. To the untrained eye, it all looks the same: wet, rock, fallen debris, seaweed tangled in lumps. But you know the difference between a stone and a shoulder blade. You've developed a kind of X-ray vision for this. And there it is, barely visible. A wide, flat skull peeking out from the cliff face. Your heart stumbles a beat. It's not like the ichthyosaurs you found before. This one is different. You pull your pick from your satchel and begin carving around it with surgical care. Bit by bit, hour by hour, you expose something that no one has ever seen. The creature's neck is long, longer than any marine fossil you've uncovered. It stretches like a swan's, only thicker, more muscular. The flippers are broad and paddle-like, and the head is strange, too small for the body, with teeth designed not for tearing but grasping. You don't know it yet, but you've just discovered the plesiosaurus, a creature so bizarre that some future scientists will insist it's a hoax. But right now, you just know it's real. You sketch it as you go, noting every bone, every socket, every ridge. You'll have to work quickly. The tides are creeping back in, and a sudden downpour could ruin everything. But this time luck stays with you. You haul the bones back to your home in batches, storing them under the kitchen table, behind the curtains, even under your mattress. A plesiosaur skeleton sleeps where you sleep. Word spreads fast. When you display the fossil in your shop, even the skeptical visitors can't deny its otherworldliness. Some gasp, some laugh nervously. One clergyman stares for nearly an hour before walking out, muttering something about unnatural anatomy. Scientists flock to see it among them. William Conybeare, a prominent geologist and clergyman. He believes in your discovery, but of course he writes the formal description. You, the finder, the digger, the preparer, are given a brief mention, like a footnote. Still, the plesiosaur causes a sensation. Newspapers publish sensational drawings. A few joke that you've unearthed a dragon. One skeptical French scientist refuses to believe the fossil is real, claiming the skeleton is a composite, a forgery made by someone assembling parts from different animals. The anatomy is too strange, he says. It defies sense. Historians still argue whether this was sincere skepticism or professional jealousy. Whatever the motive, your discovery becomes one of the most debated fossils in early paleontological history. And slowly, reluctantly, the world begins to take you seriously. Sort of. You're still not allowed to join scientific societies. You're not invited to lectures. You receive no medals, no titles. But they come to your shop now. They ask questions. They listen more. And sometimes, rarely, they credit you properly. But here's the absurd truth: you can't afford coal. You, the woman who dragged a prehistoric sea monster out of a cliff with her bare hands, still bargain over firewood and salt. Fame hasn't brought fortune. Just a slightly heavier mailbag. Still you work. Because the plesiosaur, your long-necked sea beast, has changed something. Not just in science. In you. You've seen what the past holds. You've held it in your hands, wiped clay from its teeth, traced the curve of its ribs like the pages of a secret book. You start wondering what else might be out there. what hasn't been found. If there are creatures buried even deeper, stranger bones, waiting for the right storm, the right eyes, the right hands. One afternoon, while packing away some smaller fossils, you stumble upon a fragment you'd nearly forgotten. A tiny jaw, unusual shape, serrated teeth. It doesn't match anything you've cataloged before. You smile. Trey looks up, ears twitching. You tell him we're not done yet. You've begun to recognize their faces. The scientists, that is, or the ones who call themselves scientists, usually men, usually older, usually fond of phrases like, "my dear girl," and "surely you had some help." They come from London with cravats, sideburns, and notebooks full of blank pages. Pages they intend to fill with your findings. But they never say it like that. You let them talk. You pour tea. You answer their questions when they're polite, and occasionally when they're not. You show them the bones, the sketches, the carefully labeled drawers of belemnites, ammonites, vertebrae, and partial skulls. And then you watch them leave, taking notes in tight looping cursive. Later you'll read their published work page after page where your name is mentioned only in passing, if at all. But it's not all theft, not all ego. Some are genuinely curious, genuinely respectful. A few even stay long enough to help dig. One brings you a better chisel. Another sends charcoal and good quality drawing paper from London. They may not see you as an equal, but they know in the marrow of their scientific bones that you know things they don't. You've become a quiet legend in the geological world. Not officially, of course. The Geological Society of London doesn't allow women to join, but its members keep appearing in your doorway nonetheless. You notice a pattern. They arrive skeptical, leave impressed, and later present your finds as part of their careers. One day a man named Richard Owen visits. You'll hear more about him in years to come. He has a sharp mind, a sharper tongue, and an ambition the size of a plesiosaur. He's fascinated by your finds, but also wary. He knows your discoveries are real. He just wishes they weren't yours. Still, he studies them carefully. And one day, he'll coin a term based partly on fossils you helped unearth, dinosauria, meaning terrible lizards, the beasts of deep time. The word will travel far. It will light up imaginations and science fairs for centuries, and it will rest unknowingly on your shoulders. Back in Lyme, you continue your work. No fanfare, no university position, but the cliffs don't care about titles. They continue to offer you riddles. You continue to solve them. It's not always easy. One week you suffer a minor landslide, your boot gets stuck, you twist your ankle, and it takes an hour of crawling before someone hears your calls. Another time a crate of fossils falls during a storm and shatters months of work. And the bills keep piling up. No one ever warns you how expensive it is to be brilliant while poor. You start to fall ill more often. Your hands ache in the morning. Your chest tightens in the cold. The local doctor prescribes a peculiar mix of warm ale mustard poultices and something called tincture of rhubarb. It does nothing but make your tongue feel odd. You go back to sea air and stubbornness. Those work better. Still, your reputation grows. Not just in England, but abroad. Letters arrive from Germany, France, even America scientists, asking questions, requesting sketches, hoping for specimens. You reply to as many as you can in your careful hand using ink you sometimes water down to make it last longer. Here's a quirky fact. At one point, a clergyman sends you a fossilized fish spine in a velvet pouch, asking whether it proves Noah's flood. You stare at it for a long while before replying politely, "Not quite." Despite it all, you find moments of joy. Children knock on your shop door with small finds in hand, bits of shell-chipped rocks, and ask if they've discovered anything rare. You always take a look. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes, to their wide-eyed amazement, it's something truly ancient. You've become not just a fossil hunter, but a teacher. A quiet one, an unofficial one, but a teacher all the same. Still, you remain excluded from most formal academic circles. There's a story you'll never forget. One of your fossils is being presented at a prestigious lecture in London. You aren't invited, you aren't even told. You hear about it secondhand. They show your find. Use your drawings. Speak your words. But you are not there. Historians still argue whether this was oversight or intention, whether the barriers were personal, institutional, or both. The letters and archives give conflicting clues. But you've learned something by now. You don't need to be in the room for your work to speak. And speak it does. In fact, one evening you overhear a visitor refer to you as the woman who makes bones talk. You like that. You write it down on a scrap of paper. Later you'll tuck it into a drawer full of ammonites. You never show it to anyone, but you smile whenever you see it. Because that's what you do. You make the ancient whisper. And no lecture hall in the world can silence that. It's a clear morning for once sunlight spilling across the cliffs like warm honey, the sea pulled back into a rare hush. You take that as permission. Permission to wander a little slower, breathe a little deeper, and maybe even enjoy the view before the real work begins. The tide has carved new patterns into the mudstone, leaving behind fresh sheets of sediment, like pages in a book you've read a dozen times, and still find surprises in. Trey trots beside you, tail curled like a question mark, occasionally lunging at invisible crabs. Today you're not looking for anything in particular. You're just walking hands in your apron pockets, letting the cliffs decide if they'll speak. That's how it often happens now. The best finds seem to come when you're not chasing them, and then your boot snags on something. You almost fall flat, but catch yourself just in time, dignity intact mostly. You look down. Protruding from the silt is a small ridged fragment, too regular to be a stone. You kneel, brushing away sand, revealing what seems to be jaws, but not reptilian and not fish. They're fine-boned, delicate curved, avian mammalian. You don't know yet, but it's enough to make you haul out your tools. Over the next several hours, you expose what appears to be the skull of a flying creature, long snout, fine teeth, crested brow. Not a bird, not a bat, something else. You've heard rumors of fossils like this from Germany. Pterodactyls, they're called. Flying reptiles. But none have ever been found on British soil. Until now. You work carefully in silence, heart thumping. This is different. This is important. And sure enough, when you bring the specimen back to town and clean it over several days, you confirm what you hoped it's Britain's first known pterosaur. This time the scientists don't argue. They hesitate, yes, but eventually they admit it. Even the skeptical ones can't deny the evidence. You've found a creature that once flew above ancient seas, catching fish with needlepoint jaws. You've added wings to a world that had only just begun to imagine such things. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel a flicker of triumph. Still, the same patterns play out. The specimen is examined, described, and written about in all the proper circles. But when the formal papers are published, your name again is either misspelled or omitted entirely. One publication even thanks the gentleman who acquired the fossil. You bite your tongue. The fossil was not acquired. It was unearthed by you inch by inch. with frozen fingers and aching knees. Historians still argue whether these repeated omissions were accidental or systemic, whether it was sheer oversight or the unspoken rules of gender and class. But you've stopped expecting fairness from the scholarly world. You just keep digging, and your finds grow stranger. One month you uncover what looks like a fish, but with limbs. Another time you dig out a fossilized coprolite. Yes, ancient dung, which you keep because you know waste tells stories too. A visiting gentleman once laughs when you show him your fossil poop. You explain to him in excruciating detail how studying coprolites helps identify ancient diets, digestive patterns, even ecosystems. He goes silent. You enjoy that part. You've developed your own system for classifying finds scribbled in notebooks and margin scraps. You have diagrams and cross-sections that most university students couldn't replicate. You've started noting the precise geological layers where different fossils appear years before it becomes standard scientific practice. Here's a charming oddity local artists begin using ammonites in their jewelry, calling them snake stones. You once saw a brooch made from one of your discarded specimens. It was hideous, and you loved it. Still, not everyone is kind. Some townspeople whisper that you spend too much time alone, that the cliffs have made you odd. One woman refers to you as a she-fossil. You nearly thank her for the compliment. In your mind, it's the most accurate thing she's ever said. The truth is you've become part of the landscape, just like the layers in the stone, the tides, the wind-whipped grass on the cliff's edge. Children grow up seeing you pass by hammer in hand and barely notice. The sea air has aged your face faster than your years, and your hair stays pulled back in a practical twist. You wear boots worn nearly through. Your hands are always dirty, but you are respected, even if the respect is rarely spoken. One rainy evening, a letter arrives. It's from a young girl in London who read about your plesiosaur. She says she wants to be just like Miss Anning. You fold the letter slowly, hold it against your chest, and sit in silence for a long while, because you know what that means. It means someone's listening. Someone who might not need permission to dig. Rain pelts the windows like thrown pebbles, and the wind howls with all the fury of the sea gods you sometimes imagine lying just beneath the waves. Trey has curled himself into a damp circle by the hearth, his tail twitching at every gust. You sit by the window, a shawl draped over your shoulders, watching the water trace patterns down the glass. The cliffs will be treacherous today. Slick, unstable, but promising. It's on days like these that the earth breaks open. You tie your bonnet tighter step into your worn boots and make your way out through the fog. Your basket is strapped tight across your back. Your coat smells faintly of salt and firewood. Most of the town is still asleep, but you know the cliffs never rest. They shift. In darkness, shed their layers with every storm, whispering secrets to those willing to freeze their bones to hear them. The sea has pulled far out, revealing a wide swath of rock littered with debris. You walk the line between safety and ambition, every step chosen with practiced calculation. You're not invincible, though. At times it feels that way. You've survived lightning landslides and polite scientists. What's a little rain? Then you see it. A ridge barely an inch of exposed bone jutting from a fallen slab of limestone. Not large, not dramatic, but familiar. Too familiar. You crouch beside it, trace it with your thumb, and feel the pattern click into your memory. It's part of a skull, and not just any skull. A species you recognize from a fossil you saw sketched in a foreign journal months ago. This one, though, is more complete. As you chip away the surrounding stone, the structure emerges flattened but powerful, with a jawbone that stretches longer than your forearm. Unlike the sleek, fish-like ichthyosaurs or the long-necked plesiosaurs, this creature looks built for brute force, a marine reptile with jaws designed to crush, not pierce. It's the fossil now known as a Temnodontosaurus, though at this point no one's quite sure what to call it. The excavation takes days, maybe weeks. You lose track. You return every morning, brush in hand, fingers red with cold jaw set. The tide challenges you, constantly pushing closer, daring you to quit. But you don't. At one point, a slab shifts dangerously close to your leg. You freeze. Trey barks from above. A fisherman shouts. You hold still until the stone settles again. Only then do you move. And later, when you finally haul the massive jaw back to your cottage, strapped to a wheelbarrow with strips of torn curtain, you don't even flinch at the weight. You've carried heavier on your back, in your chest. This new fossil earns attention quickly, not just for its size, but for what it implies. That marine reptiles were not just diverse, but competitive. That they evolved into predators of every imaginable shape and strategy. The idea of ancient seas as ecosystems, not freak shows, begins to take shape in the scientific imagination. And here's a curious little twist. One of the jaws you uncover bears strange notches. At first you think they're just damage. But upon closer inspection, they appear to be bite marks from another creature, perhaps even another of its own kind. Historians and paleontologists still debate that detail to this day. Was it scavenged? Was it attacked? Or did it simply die and decay in a way that mimicked violence? The answer remains as fossilized as the bone itself. But the question is what matters. You've shifted the narrative from isolated finds to dynamic stories. You start keeping more detailed journals, not just sketches and specimen lists, but notes on rock layers, coloration, composition. You become an informal stratigrapher, recording the arrangement of sediment with an attention to detail that puts some scholars to shame. You even begin writing to a few scientists directly. Some reply, some don't. But a few, the ones who matter, begin to see you not just as a collector, but a colleague, an expert, an observer of the ancient, in a way they seated comfortably in their city libraries never could be. And still the townspeople watch you, some with quiet pride, others with suspicion. Children wave as you pass, calling you the Bone Lady. A few men scoff, mutter about women's work. One young curate corners you outside the bakery and asks if you ever worry you're tampering with God's plan. You blink slowly and suggest that God must have really liked marine reptiles. Then you buy your bread and leave. Here's a strange fact: a few visitors begin bringing you small gifts. Not money usually, but tea gloves, wrapping paper, things you might need but never buy for yourself. You accept them with thanks and move on. You never ask for help, but sometimes it comes anyway. The winter grows colder, your hands stiffen in the mornings. Trey sleeps longer, but the cliffs still call. They always do, and you still answer. One day, while filing a particularly sharp vertebra into its display tray, you glance at the wall behind your desk. There's a shadow cast there by the candlelight, a long-necked curve, a snout, the flicker of ancient teeth. You smile, because whether or not the world remembers your name, you've already rewritten the past. Spring arrives like a whispered apology, hesitant, damp, and late. The streets of Lyme Regis remain slick with seawater and gossip, but you sense a shift in the wind. Crocuses poke through muddy walkways. The air smells less of brine and more of something green and growing. You allow yourself a slower pace down to the cliffs, not because your curiosity has dulled, never that, but because your joints ache louder these days. You wrap your fingers around the handle of your fossil hammer, the wood worn smooth by years of grip, and let the sea breeze wake your face. Trey limps now too, an old companion with a scar on his ear from that time. A falling rock nearly made you both fossils. You walk side by side in the hush of morning, your rhythm matched by mutual wear and memory. There's a new layer of shale exposed today, sleek, wet, and gleaming in the weak sun. You pause to inspect it, brush your fingers across its surface. Nothing obvious, just that quiet pull again, the feeling that something is close, waiting. You dig anyway, because you always dig. And today you're rewarded, a series of vertebrae, unusually small surface under your careful work, then ribs, then, oddly, tiny fragile claws. They're delicate, bird-like, but not quite. You work patiently, drawing each piece in your journal before removing it. Bit by bit, the shape emerges, a creature with a flattened body, elongated tail, and a distinctive skull. Not fish, not reptile, something in between. You found what future generations will call a squamata, an ancestor to modern lizards, a missing link in the evolution of scaled creatures. At the time, it has no formal name, but in your notes you mark it as reptile probable transitional form. Just a small scribble in the corner of the page. You've learned not to expect fanfare. As you clean the bones, your mother watches from the corner of the room. She doesn't ask questions anymore. She just pours tea and makes sure your scarf is dry. The silence between you two is companionable now. The arguments about ladylike behavior, marriage prospects, and God's design have long since faded. She sees what you do. She knows it matters. One evening, a knock sounds at the door. A stranger well-dressed with the unmistakable posture of academic pride asks if he may view your collection. You show him in point to the trays of labeled bones, the shelves of ammonites, the jawbones stacked like puzzle pieces. He walks through the room in silence. Then he turns and says, "I had not imagined such order." You smile politely. "The earth is ordered, sir. You just have to know how to listen." He chuckles awkwardly and writes your name correctly into his notebook. Progress. Historians still argue whether your notes, particularly those involving this small squamate fossil, laid groundwork for early evolutionary theory. Some say Darwin was aware of your work. Others say it influenced his circle through second-hand reports. There are no letters to confirm it, no journals that name you. But your footprints are there if one knows where to look. Here's something charming. You've begun pressing flowers into the margins of your notebooks. Not scientifically relevant, of course, but after years of dirt and bone, you find it comforting to leave something soft among the ancient. You paste in primroses, sea thrift, even a sprig of heather, fossils on one page, petals on the next. You've also taken to repairing the fossil shop's signage. The old board had faded to near illegibility, and more than once, confused passers-by had asked if you sold laundry soap. So you repaint it yourself in bold, careful letters. Anning's Fossils, Curiosities of Deep Time. Underneath you add in smaller script, specimens for study or display. All inquiries welcome. You begin receiving letters addressed simply to Miss Fossil Lyme Regis. The postman smiles each time he delivers one. You never correct him, and then one morning a visitor arrives with something unusual, a fossil of unknown origin, a slab of stone with strange impressions, feathers maybe, or leaves, or scales, he's not sure. He asks your opinion. You study it for a long time. It's not from Dorset, that much is clear. The stone is different, lighter, more porous, but the patterns intrigue you. You fetch your magnifying glass, adjust the light, and lean in. There are symmetrical ridges, a hollowed center, the ghost of movement. You look up at the man and say, "This is something new." He doesn't understand, not really, but he nods and leaves the fossil with you. You spend the next week sketching it, flipping through your journals, comparing it to everything you've seen. It doesn't quite fit, but that excites you. It means the story isn't finished. It never was. And at night, as you sip weak tea beside the fire, the fossil sits nearby on your work table, just within reach, waiting to be understood, like you. Summer rolls in reluctantly, the way it always does, on the coast. Less a burst of sunshine and more a slow drying of mist. The mornings are warmer now, the gulls louder, the cobblestones along Broad Street steaming gently after a rare full day of sun. You take it as a blessing, though you still keep a shawl close. The sea doesn't trust summer for long. This morning you set out earlier than usual. The tide calendar shows a longer window before the water turns greedy again. You carry your tools in a basket lined with linen soft to protect fragile finds. Over the years, you've learned that wrapping ancient bones in fabric meant for dresses feels like a kind of poetry. You offer gentleness to something the earth held for millions of years. You reach the cliffs and begin your usual scan. There's comfort in the ritual. Eyes to the ground, then up the strata. You note fresh slides from the storm 2 nights ago, new wounds on the cliff face, new opportunities. And today the cliffs have something to say. Halfway up the path you spot it, a flattened outline, unmistakably vertebral, with cross-hatching that suggests muscle or fin impressions. Your breath catches. You've seen fossils like this before, rare ones, with preserved soft tissue. Not just bone, but the imprint of life itself. That delicate whisper left behind as muscle decayed and was slowly replaced by silt and time. You kneel, knees pressing into the damp shale, and begin brushing. It's slow, painstaking. You barely breathe. You brush as if touching skin. A fin emerges wide, tapered. And there along the curve are traces of scale patterns. You know immediately this is not just another ichthyosaur. It's better. You work for days, carefully, even lovingly. The fossil is too large to extract all at once, so you map it. First draw every segment, label each section, mark every discoloration in the stone. You create a full profile on paper before the first chisel strike. You've become not just a fossil hunter, but a conservator, an archivist of the forgotten. When you finally present it in your shop, scholars come faster than usual. One recognizes it immediately and writes a glowing article. He calls it the finest specimen of marine reptile soft tissue preservation in the British Isles. Another sends a lithograph artist to copy your sketches for a new geological monograph. You stand quietly as they marvel. You offer tea. You don't correct them when they fumble the pronunciation of Anning. But one visitor asks something unexpected. He asks for your opinion, not your permission, not your sketch, not your name for citation, your thoughts. You blink at first, unsure he means it, but he does. You take him through your diagrams. You explain your theory that this creature had adaptations, unlike any seen before in other ichthyosaurs. The shape of the fin, the scale pattern, even the muscle ridges suggest a different hunting style, perhaps faster, more agile. A predator of shallows, not just depths. He listens, takes notes, and when he publishes his findings, Later that year, your name is there. Spelled right, cited clearly, not buried in a footnote, but in the introduction. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the beginning of your formal recognition by the academic world. Some say it was too little too late. Others insist it was the turning of a tide. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the sediment. But you smile, because what matters to you is that the bones are finally being heard. You've spent your life amplifying their stories. Now someone is amplifying yours. That evening you return home to find a package wrapped in brown paper on your doorstep. Inside a leather-bound notebook, blank and waiting. No name, no sender. Just a note inside the front cover for recording what the rocks forgot. You press your fingers to the page and close your eyes. That night you don't sleep easily. Not from worry, but from excitement. You dream of ancient seas, full of light and teeth and impossible shapes. You dream of your younger self, hammer in hand, standing before a cliff that opens like a book. And when you wake heart thudding with possibility, you know exactly where you'll go next. Because the cliffs are never done speaking, and neither are you. The cliffs are quieter these days. Or maybe it's you who's changed, more attuned to their silences than their shouts. You no longer need the dramatic storms, the grand rock slides, the crashing fanfare of discovery. You've come to appreciate the subtle gestures. A hairline crack, a sliver of exposed stone, the faint gleam of calcite caught in the corner of your eye. These are the moments where real stories begin. Trey no longer joins you. His absence lingers like a tide gone out. You buried him beneath a cairn on the edge of your favorite outcrop where the sea can lull him to sleep forever. Some evenings you still glance back, half expecting to see him bounding down the path. But the cliffs don't give back what they take. They never have. You bring his collar with you now, tied to your satchel like a talisman. For luck, for memory. This morning as you reach a familiar stretch along the black ven, your boots crunch on newly dislodged shale. The edge is more eroded than yesterday. The land is literally slipping away inch by inch. You sigh not in frustration, but in gratitude. Time is generous when it crumbles. As you inspect the ground, your gaze catches a pattern you know by heart. Concentric spirals faintly raised like a fingerprint left by the sea itself. Ammonites, dozens of them, all within a single fallen slab. It's what's known as a death assemblage, a sudden burial of creatures preserved mid-motion. You crouch beside it, running your hands over the stone. Each shell is delicate, detailed, and perfectly preserved. You imagine the moment they were trapped. A sudden silt fall, a landslide. Perhaps a chemical shift in the water. Historians still argue about the exact mechanisms of mass ammonite die-offs, but the result is always the same exquisite stillness. You take the slab home in parts, wrapping each section in linen and nestling them among blankets. You spend hours reassembling it on your workbench like a mosaic. When it's finally whole again, it looks like a frozen whirlpool movement captured in stone. Visitors are entranced. Some think it's art. You nod and say it's both. Word spreads quickly. A natural history museum from London writes asking to purchase it. You decline, not out of pride, but out of instinct. Some things should stay close to the sea. Later that week, a woman visits your shop. Her name is Charlotte, and she's a writer, not a scientist, not a collector. Just curious. She's heard your name in passing, read an article, seen a fossil, with your initials carved discreetly into the base. She asks if she can write about your life. You pause. You've always resisted attention, always felt it muddled the work. But Charlotte is different. She listens more than she speaks. She watches how your hands move when you talk about bone, so you let her sit by the fire while you work. She asks gentle questions. You give honest answers about your father, about the storms, about your mother's hands cracked from washing ammonites in salt water, about the first time you heard the word paleontology and realized it described something you'd already been doing for years. Charlotte returns several times. You never ask what she's writing, but one day she leaves a folded paper on your table marked with your name. It's a poem. Not about fossils, about you. You read it in the quiet after dusk as the waves retreat and the fire pops softly in the grate. It speaks of salt and stone, of silence and stubbornness, of a woman who listens when the earth whispers. You cry for the first time in months. Here's something odd. You begin to dream again. Vivid dreams, full of ancient creatures and warm oceans and flickering lights underwater. You wake with sketches in your head, half-formed theories about marine movement, fin articulation, eye socket structure. You scribble them down before they fade. You even mail one to a professor in Edinburgh. He replies months later with cautious praise. Says your insight into ichthyosaur tail curvature is most intriguing. You pin the letter to the wall. The world is changing, if only slightly. Women are still not welcomed in scientific halls. You are still spoken about in passive voice found by a local, collected by a woman in Lyme. But the gaps are narrowing. Your name appears more often and less apologetically. And here's something truly remarkable. A young girl visits with her mother. She carries a small wooden box filled with fossils, her own collection. Ammonites, some belemnites, even a shark's tooth. She says, "I want to be like you." You kneel, meet her eyes, and say, "You already are." The world continues to shift around you slowly, unevenly, like the cliff face you've watched crumble and rebuild 100 times. The world of science, too, is changing. You feel it even from your quiet shop on the edge of Lyme Regis. Letters arrive from further afield now from scholars in Edinburgh, Paris, New York. They all speak of evolution, extinction, ancient environments, and in some quiet way of you. They don't always say your name, but your handwriting is in their diagrams. Your fingerprints are in their hypotheses, and in the margins of their published papers are footnotes that read things like specimen attributed to Anning collection or site first surveyed by M.A. You have become at last the ghost in the library. This morning the post brings something rare, an invitation from a museum in London. They request your presence for a private tour of their new fossil gallery, your ichthyosaur, your plesiosaur, even the pterosaur you found years ago now, perched behind glass. As if it never knew the taste of wind. You read the letter 3 times. You don't go. It's not bitterness. You just don't want to. The cliffs are your gallery. The wind is your welcome speech. And besides, your knees ache too much to endure that journey. You tuck the letter into a book, not forgotten but shelved. Instead, you spend your days cataloging. You've started an index handwritten slow and meticulous with ink that smudges if you're too quick. Every specimen you've ever found, every location, every stratum, every season. It's your personal archive, one you hope someone will keep long after you're gone. You've also begun mentoring quietly. A few local children, mostly girls, stop by after lessons, pretending at first to be curious about ammonites, but clearly hoping to watch you work. You show them how to read a rock's surface like Braille, how to coax truth out of stone without force, how to listen before chiseling. One girl, Eleanor, surprises you by identifying a vertebra before you can. You smile at her wide and warm. "That's a better eye than I had at your age," you tell her. She blushes. Her mother beams. It's one of your quiet joys, knowing the cliffs will still be red after you. One day a familiar face returns, Lady Philpott, eccentric as ever, draped in shawls and theories. She's brought more specimens for you to inspect, some from her own garden, others from her travels. She always defers to your judgment, which still catches you off guard. A woman of rank asking you for your thoughts. You sit together in your shop, sipping lukewarm tea surrounded by bones and fragments. She talks of geology, of religion, of loneliness. You talk of the sea. She tells you that your name has been suggested for inclusion in a new scientific publication. You nod, unsure if it will happen and whether it matters. And here's something oddly sweet. She gives you a new pair of gloves, sturdy woolen and just your size. You'll need them, she says. The earth hasn't finished speaking to you yet, she's right. Because later that week, during a routine walk along the beach, you spot something strange. Tiny bones clustered in a perfect semicircle, as though a creature curled up to sleep 100 million years ago and never woke. You kneel, heartbeat steady, and begin clearing it. A juvenile ichthyosaur. No longer than a cat, but perfectly intact. A child of the sea, preserved with such gentleness it nearly breaks your heart. You carry it home wrapped in your shawl. That night, you write about it in your journal. Not just the discovery, but the feeling of it, the emotion, the way the bones seemed to trust you. You don't show anyone those pages. Historians still debate whether this final phase of your work, your indexing your field, sketches your mentorship, should be considered your greatest contribution. The fossils were important, but the methods, the way you systematized everything from layer to limb, that was science evolving through your ink-stained hands. Still, your body grows weary. The stiffness in your joints spreads. Some days your fingers won't close properly around the chisel. You rest more often, wrap your shawl tighter, drink more tea than ever seems effective. You've seen so many bones, but never your own reflected in them, and yet you're not afraid. You've been facing time your whole life, holding it, cracking it open, brushing off its dust. You've whispered to ghosts, shown the world their spines and skulls. Let them be remembered. And slowly, ever so slowly, you feel yourself becoming part of that same memory. It's a still morning, no breeze, no crashing surf, just the distant caw of gulls and the soft creak of floorboards under your feet. You wake slowly, joints stiff, lungs reluctant. The fire has gone out during the night. Again, you sit on the edge of your bed, listening to the quiet, letting the weight of the day settle on your shoulders before you reach for your shawl. There's a kind of hush that settles in Lyme Regis during late autumn. The air thickens with mist, and the tourists vanish, leaving the town to its year-round ghosts. You find peace in the emptiness. The cliffs are yours again, the fossils undisturbed. No one watches, no one interrupts. Only you and the sea and the long memory of stone. Today you decide to visit the beach, not to dig, but simply to walk. You leave your tools behind. Just you and your basket, a warm brick wrapped in cloth tucked inside to keep your hands from freezing. As you descend the path, the mist parts slowly, like a curtain, reluctant to reveal what's behind it. You pass the spot where you found the first ichthyosaur. The cliff has changed, of course. New cracks, new scars. You pause and touch the stone gently. A silent greeting, an old friend. You sit on a rock, the same rock you used to perch on while sketching with your father. It's smaller now, or maybe you're just larger in memory. You pull out a notebook and begin to write not notes, not specimen lists, but something else. Thoughts, feelings, things you've never quite said aloud. You write about the way the sea smells before a storm, the way ammonites catch light like coiled gold, the time a schoolboy mistook a fossilized sea lily for a cinnamon bun and tried to eat it. You chuckle softly at that one. Trey would have barked in agreement. You write about loneliness too, not as sadness, but as fact. A constant companion. You never married. There were offers once or twice, but none felt right. You couldn't imagine sharing your quiet with someone who didn't hear what you heard in the rocks. You write about faith, though you keep it vague. You've never quite reconciled the fossils with the sermons. Sea monsters and Genesis don't sit comfortably in the same pew. But you've always believed in something. A kind of divine patience, maybe. A design you can't name but can chisel out of stone with your own hands. Later, back in your cottage, you sit by the fire and unwrap the brick. It's still warm. You press it to your chest and close your eyes. The crackling of the hearth becomes a kind of lullaby. Your notebook rests on your knees, still open, the last sentence trailing off mid-thought. Here's something strange. You've started noticing patterns. In the ammonites, tiny variations, repeating spirals, irregular ridges. You wonder briefly whether these differences could tell you something more. Something about environment or evolution or survival. You sketch them anyway. That week, a letter arrives from an admirer in Cambridge, a young geologist who thanks you for your detailed stratigraphy notes. He says they've helped him identify a new sediment layer along the Welsh coast. He calls you the silent architect of our understanding. You fold the letter carefully and place it with the others. The drawer is full now. The vicar stops by that Sunday with a gift, a small pie, and a pair of woolen mittens knitted by the parish girls. He seems surprised when you thank him without sarcasm. They thought you might like the warmth, he mumbles. You do. Historians still argue about your religious beliefs. Some claim you clung tightly to Christianity, others that you drifted toward agnosticism. There are no definitive records. Only snippets in letters, fragments of thought, scribbled in margins, as if even your faith, like your fossils, had to be uncovered slowly. One night you dream of walking beneath the sea, not drowning, just walking. The water is warm, and light filters through in soft ribbons. Fossils drift by like petals. You reach out and touch the skull of a plesiosaur, and it nods to you almost kindly. When you wake, the image lingers. You wrap your shawl tighter and write it down. The sun this morning is shy, blinking through a veil of low gray cloud. It offers no warmth, only light, and even that feels borrowed. You step out into the chill, your shawl wrapped tight around your shoulders, and breathe in air that tastes faintly of seaweed and wood smoke. The streets of Lyme Regis are quiet, postcard still. A cat dozes in a bakery window. A gull watches you from a chimney like it's weighing your worth. You walk slowly now. The weight in your legs isn't from age alone. It's the years, the memories, the endless up and down of cliffs, tools, baskets, boxes. Your hands still bear the calluses of a laborer, though they tremble more than they used to. Still you go. The path to the churchyard rises steeply, but your feet know it well. There are grooves in the stones that fit the soles of your boots, like old friends. Your father's grave is tucked beneath a leaning yew tree where moss creeps over every edge, and the names are half swallowed by time. You kneel beside the stone, brushing lichen from the letters with your glove. You speak to him softly about the ammonites you've cataloged this week, about the school children who peer through your shop window, faces smudged with curiosity. You speak not because you expect a reply, but because you always have. You've told your father everything even after he was gone. You sit there a long while until the cold climbs into your spine. Then with a grunt you rise and begin the descent toward the sea. At home, your living room has become a sort of sanctum, shelves stacked with labeled trays, drawers full of shell fragments, windowsills lined with teeth and ribs and ancient vertebrae. It smells of salt wax and thyme. You move through it like a curator and a caretaker. Every piece has its place. The kettle whistles. You pour a cup of tea and sit with it pressed between your palms, listening to the wind at the door. There's something soothing in the solitude. Your days have always been filled more with stone than with voices. You've built a quiet life layered like the cliffs, compacted with pressure and persistence. There's a knock. You open the door to find a boy no older than 10 standing there with a battered satchel and wide eyes. He says he's been told you know everything about fossils. You laugh gently, kindly, and invite him in. He unpacks his treasures on your work table, a few ammonites, one good belemnite, and something strange and triangular. You pick it up and hold it to the light. It's not a fossil, just a chipped bit of Victorian roof tile. But you don't say that. Instead, you point out the grooves, show him the difference between stone and bone, and let him decide for himself. He leaves 30 minutes later, his grin as wide as the channel. You return to your work. There are field notes to finish specimens to catalog. You've begun transcribing your older journals, something you once swore you'd never bother with. But you're finding pleasure in the clarity of it. You correct misspellings. You rephrase your early entries with the wisdom of your later years. You're not rewriting your story, just sharpening it. And here's something odd: the British Museum has sent a second letter. This time not to request a specimen, but to offer a small stipend for your consultation on the arrangement of their fossil exhibits. It's not a fortune, but it's the first time they've offered to pay you for your mind, not your bones. Historians still debate whether this marked a formal recognition of your contributions or was merely a polite nod to a long overdue debt. Some call it an act of inclusion, others a gesture of guilt. But you don't care for the debate. You simply cash the check and buy yourself better paper. You also buy a new shawl. Thick wool dyed a deep burgundy with long tasseled ends. You wear it on your next walk to the cliffs. It doesn't keep the wind out entirely, but it makes you feel dignified. You deserve that much. On the beach, you pause at the place where the plesiosaur once slept beneath the shale. The tide's further out than usual, the rock shelf exposed and gleaming. You run your hand over the surface, feeling the faint ridges left by ancient waves. You crouch and dig with your fingers till your nails are dark with grit. There's something there. You uncover it, slowly brushing with a pocket cloth. It's nothing dramatic, just a fragment of fin bone, but it thrills you all the same. Because even now, after everything the cliffs are still whispering, you bring it home, clean it gently, and set it beside your tea. A reminder that the work never ends. That evening you light a candle and flip through your oldest sketchbook. The pages are brittle, stained with time. There's a drawing of your first ichthyosaur penciled in soft lines. The jaw not quite right. Your handwriting is small, uncertain. You touch the page with the back of your hand. Here's a fringe detail you've never shared you used to hum while digging. Just nonsense melodies. You weren't even aware of it until someone told you once years ago. You stopped after that. But tonight, as the fire crackles low, you hear the tune again, in your head. Or maybe from the walls. And here's one last curiosity. A small moth has landed on your windowsill. It flutters twice, then stays. You watch it until you drift off your notebook, open in your lap, your shawl slipping from one shoulder, and a smile tucked quietly into the corner of your mouth. The next morning arrives slowly, as if the sky itself is reluctant to begin. You wake before the sun fully lifts above the sea, and for a moment you lie still, listening to the hush of the town, the low breath of waves rolling onto shore, and the faint ticking of the mantel clock. You've always loved this hour, the stretch of quiet before the day opens its mouth and begins to chatter. Your joints ache a little more than usual. A stiffness behind the eyes, a weariness that doesn't quite go away with tea. But you rise anyway. Always you rise. There are still notes to sort, letters to answer, bones to hold. At your desk, a small pile of correspondence awaits. One letter bears a wax seal, neatly pressed, professionally folded. You recognize the emblem. It's from a scientific society. Not the Royal Society, of course. That door remains closed. But another more recently founded one with a growing interest in natural history, and at last, its female contributors. They want to feature your ammonite illustrations in an upcoming volume. You let out a small breath. Not disbelief, just the kind of quiet release that comes when the world finally begins to shift. Not a tidal wave of change, but a subtle turning of the current. You pour a second cup of tea, and without quite meaning to find yourself tracing the spiral ridges of a nearby fossil. It's one of your favorites, Dactylioceras commune common, yes, but perfect in its geometry. You've always felt they resemble the inner workings of thought, like time folding in on itself. Later that day, you return to the cliffs. The walk is slower now, and you pause more often to rest. But the sea is calm and the path familiar. Along the shoreline, you spot something half buried in sand. Not a fossil, just a tattered glove caught on a rock. You pick it up anyway. Everything tells a story. You spend hours simply walking, eyes sweeping the ground, like a painter scanning a canvas. You don't expect to find anything, and that's precisely when you do. Just a fragment, two bones, nestled together like the knees of something long curled into sleep. You recognize them instantly, limb bones, possibly marine reptile, but small, juvenile perhaps. You pull out your sketchbook and make a quick drawing. The light's beginning to fade and the tide is on its way back in. You mark the spot with a small stone cairn and head home, the wind nudging at your back like an old friend. In the doorway you stop and turn, looking once more at the sea. A farewell perhaps, or just a promise to return? Back inside the room is dim. The hearth flickers weakly. You light another candle and begin working through the pile of unfiled notes. Each page holds a piece of a life spent in observation, in dirt, in chalk, in bones. You organize them not by date, but by strata. Lias, inferior, oolite Fuller's Earth. Your own geological autobiography. And here's a fringe tidbit you've begun naming the drawers in your collection after the people who never believed in you. One for the man who told you fossil hunting was unsuitable. One for the clergyman who insisted plesiosaurs were fabricated. One lovingly for the professor who asked if your sketches were traced. That one contains your finest specimen. You receive a visit from your neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, who brings soup and asks how you're feeling. You lie and say well enough. She doesn't press. She simply stays a while, knitting quietly, while you sort through specimens. The silence is companionable. Later that night, a storm rolls in. Wind batters the shutters. Rain lashes sideways. You sit near the fire, listening to the howl, your shawl around your shoulders, and your hands wrapped around a hot brick. And you think about your younger self barefoot on the shore, a hammer too large for your hand pockets full of shells and hope. You wonder what she would say if she saw you now. You decide she'd probably ask what took everyone so long. Historians still argue over your place in the story of science. Some have called you the first true paleontologist. Others say you were simply a fossil dealer with a good eye. A few bolder voices call you a genius, an interpreter of time. You don't get to write your legacy, but you've certainly carved it. Before bed, you visit Trey's grave once more, leaving a small ammonite on top of the stones. The spiral glistens with rain. You whisper a soft good night, then return inside, closing the door against the storm. The fire burns lower now, but it's enough. You settle into your chair, open a fresh page in your notebook, and begin to write. Not about rocks or bones or layers of time, but about something deeper. Stillness, listening, the shape of memory. The wind has quieted by morning, but the world left behind by the storm feels rearranged. Puddles glint on every stone step. Clumps of seaweed hang in hedgerows. The sea has drawn back into itself, smug and swollen, and the cliffs wear fresh scars. You sip your tea in the window and watch as the sky rolls open in soft layers of silver and pearl. Your bones ache, not sharply, just persistently, as if your body is reminding you how long it's been in service to your calling. You stretch your fingers, flex your wrists, press a palm to your sternum, and feel the quiet throb of tired ribs. You know this pain now. It is not threatening, just familiar, like the damp. The day ahead holds a task you've been putting off. It's time to sort the drawer marked unknowns, the odds and ends, the fragments too worn, too small, too puzzling to classify, the pieces that have waited patient, as fossils do, for your attention. You spread them across the table in the sunlight, each one a whisper, a tiny jawbone with 3 curved teeth, a partial fin ray, a single beautifully veined leaf imprinted in shale, a fossilized fish scale with ridges that shimmer faintly when turned just right. You examine them one by one, handling each like a message sent from the bottom of time. Some make sense. You match them to earlier notes, cross-reference with drawings. Others remain mysteries, but you sketch them anyway, label them carefully. Even the smallest shard deserves its place. Later, a knock at the door startles you. It's a post-writer with a parcel wrapped in oilskin. Inside, a monograph published in Edinburgh on fossil reptiles. Your name is there, not in passing, not at the bottom, but in the acknowledgments. With thanks to Miss Mary Anning, whose observations and specimens informed much of this work. You sit for a long time holding that book, turning the pages, seeing your handwriting in their diagrams, your thoughts dressed in someone else's Latin. But this time the credit is there, plain printed, permanent. Historians still debate the true scope of your influence. Some believe you were central to the great scientific shift in understanding extinction and evolution. Others say your contributions were indirect, absorbed into the language of those who had louder voices. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the sediment. But that afternoon, in your chair by the fire, you allow yourself a quiet smile. Because you know, and the fossils know, that's enough. Here's something peculiar you've started dreaming in layers. Not story dreams, not visions, just rock. Cross sections of cliffs you've walked. Shale, clay, limestone, blue lias, each layer holding something bones. Shells leave silence. You wake with these images vivid in your mind. Sometimes you draw them, other times you simply sit and let the stillness carry you. The days are shorter now. The light arrives late and leaves early. You find yourself speaking aloud more often, not to anyone, just to the room. You comment on the weather, on your sketches, on a particularly nice curvature in a crinoid stem. The walls listen without judgment. One morning you wake to find frost edging the inside of the window pane. You trace a spiral on the glass with your fingertip and smile. You've been seeing spirals everywhere lately. Tea steam clouds, wood grain, as if the universe has started mimicking your fossils. That week, a group of school children visits the town from Dorchester. Their teacher brings them to your shop. They hover by the shelves, wide-eyed and whispering. One boy asks if you've ever met a dinosaur. You tell him only after it's been very patient. They laugh. You show them your ammonite drawers. Let them hold a belemnite. One girl says, "It looks like a wizard's wand." You nod. Perhaps it was. When they leave, their excitement lingers in the room. You sit back in your chair and remember your own first fossil, the feeling of finding it, of holding the weight of time in your palm. You whisper thank you to the air, to the cliffs, to whatever force gave you the gift of seeing. That night you prepare one of your last field kits. Not for tomorrow, just in case. The tools are wrapped neatly. The paper is folded. Your satchel hangs ready by the door. You sleep deeply without dreaming. In the early hours before dawn, a breeze rustles through the window cracks. The fire, still warm, glows softly. And on the table, a single ammonite catches the moonlight, its spiral shining like an answer. The morning air is heavy with salt, but still, a kind of peace clings to the town, the sort that only happens when even the sea seems to pause. You rise slowly, not out of weakness but care. Each movement is deliberate now. Your body a familiar creaking ship you've captained far longer than anyone expected. You open the shutters and smile faintly at the faint blue line of horizon. The tide is out. Downstairs the fire has gone cold again. You light it without hurry. The kettle takes longer these days to boil. You're not bothered. You've come to enjoy the in-between moments, the waiting, the watching. Your mind stays as sharp as ever, though you sometimes forget where you put your favorite pencil. You find it tucked behind your ear. At your desk sits the fossil. From earlier in the week, the juvenile limb bones you uncovered just before the rain returned. You've been sketching it slowly with the kind of attention one might give a portrait of someone loved. The curve of the femur, the slight twist in the joint, the suggestion of muscle that no longer exists. You wonder what it looked like in life, what waters it swam in, what chased it, what it chased. This kind of imagining is not scientific, not exactly, but it is part of the work. You've always known that. A fossil is not just a thing, it's a story with the last page missing. You write a few notes in the margin of your sketch. Structure suggests ambush predator, and then below that, in smaller letters, very young. You underline it, circle it once. A quiet thrill stirs in you. There's still more to learn. The day passes gently. You answer 2 letters, one from a young woman in London who writes to say she's been inspired to study geology after reading about your plesiosaur. She ends with, "I hope one day to visit the cliffs and hear their stories like you do." You sit with that line for a long while. You reread it, then fold the letter and place it with the others in the drawer, now too full to close properly. In the afternoon, you take your slow walk to the beach. Your shawl is thick, and your boots have been resoled twice this year already. The townsfolk greet you as they pass more warmly now than they used to. "Morning, Miss Anning. Fine weather, Mary." No one asks if you're still digging. They know the answer. You don't carry tools today, just a satchel with a biscuit, a flask of tea, and your sketchbook. The cliffs are pale in the sun, streaked with shadow. You sit on your favorite bench near Church Cliff and let the warmth soak into your back. There are new cracks high up in the strata. You note them without needing to look long. Here's a bit of fringe history. You once named an outcrop after your terrier Trey. It wasn't official, just yours. On old maps it appears as Anning's Ledge, but to you it was always Trey's Point. You smile at the memory, and for a moment you swear you hear a bark in the distance, but it's just a gull. You stay until the wind picks up, and then you return home the long way through narrow lanes and past the bakery. You stop and purchase a loaf with a coin you warm in your palm before handing over. The baker insists on adding a bun, no charge. You thank him. Quiet kindness always meant more to you than loud praise. At home, the postman has left another letter, this one from a museum curator in York. He's cataloged a specimen of yours, one sold decades ago, and he believes it may be the most complete example of its kind. He asks if you recall the layer it came from. You do, instantly. You write your reply before the kettle boils. That night you sit by the hearth, a notebook in your lap, the ammonite from your childhood resting nearby. You've kept it all these years. It's simple, cracked, nothing rare. But it was your first, the beginning of everything. You run your fingers over its curve. It fits your palm perfectly, as if your hand had grown into it. Historians still argue which fossil was your most important. Some say the ichthyosaur, others the plesiosaur. A few make the case for your soft tissue specimens, but none agree. And maybe that's just as well. You never wanted fame, you only wanted to understand, and you did. As the fire burns low, you wrap a blanket around your shoulders and glance toward the window. The stars are out tonight, scattered like bones across the dark. You whisper one word into the hush. Thank you. And sleep finds you quickly. The days have become shorter now, light trickling in late through the windows, fading almost before you've begun to settle into your work. You feel it in your bones more than your eyes, this shortening. Each sunrise arrives like a borrowed candle, and each sunset a quiet reminder that time too is a kind of sediment. It piles up and it buries things. You wake slower these days. Sometimes you sit on the edge of the bed and just breathe. Not because you lack strength, but because you've learned the value of stillness. There's no rush anymore. The cliffs are patient. The fossils wait. On this particular morning, a small sparrow taps at your window. You smile. It's been visiting all week, pecking at its reflection, mistaking itself for company.